Thank you all for your patience. We wanted to make sure that we had documents ready for everyone to view today. We'll start with a roll call. Councilor Tabor?
Here.
Councilor Lombardi?
Here.
And I'm Councilor Cook, and I'm here. As a committee, governance has been working on reviewing the Code of Ethics for several months now. And we've gone through several reiterations of the code. We've discussed this with individuals who've taken part in the process, from people who served on the committee to people who were part of the review. And at this stage, we have a red line draft of the Code of Ethics that we have reviewed already as a committee. And so we would anticipate that we are closer to finishing this review. And today we're hoping to go through that red line draft and for what is hopefully close to our final review, if not our final review. With that said, we have shared the draft for all those at home watching on Zoom, and also for anyone in the room so that they can see it up on the board. It's also was available online with the agenda. Let's start with the start of the draft. Note that everything is bolded and in red when there are changes. Under section 1.801, definitions. Did the committee have an opportunity to review this?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any questions under section 1.801?
No, not for me.
Under the official duties, number 3, in the case of the chief of police, superintendent of schools, and fire chief, the aim of that paragraph is to say official duties has to do with what their responsibilities are in their job description. So it seemed to me the city manager should be in that too.
Okay.
I don't know, I'll defer to Bob on that, but
there was a reason for this. I think the reason is because of the way this ordinance developed organically. There was, originally because of the police commission and the fire commission controlling police chief and the fire chief, there was separate language for police chief and fire chief. And that just got carried forward. You get to the very same end and also be inclusive of the city manager. Now you say that if you just added the committee wanted the language about job description, so we could add that into the prior section, and you would have rolled them all together. Or you could do what you said, add the city manager in here. I think it gets you to the exact same result.
yeah. I think we have some language for how conflict in the case of the city manager is handled, but I just thought that might be an area that would be more inclusive.
I have a question about this. Do we need to include the city manager in that paragraph since the city manager is included in the first
I
paragraph?
think the manager is covered by the existing language.
Okay.
Can we scroll up so we can see the discussion point, please?
Yes. Yes, go ahead. I think that's reasonable. And I think we're on the next page.
Yep.
We're on, here we are, under official duties, which is now section H. The question is whether or not the city manager is included in subsection 1, but whether or not the city manager also needs to be, that needs to be reiterated in section 3.
Keep in mind, this is only for the purpose of describing official duties. failing to comply with official duties is actually not an ethical violation. But there are ethical violations that are based upon official duties. So you have to look at the ethical violations, not the definition of official duties, to determine when there's an ethical violation.
Okay, okay. Counselor Tabor, your thoughts? Do you think we should still amend that, or?
I think if Bob says that it's covered in existing language, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Are there any other questions on subsection 1.801, definitions?
No.
Okay. The next section is section 1.802, conflicts of interest. And you'll note that there's only one minor change here in section G. Is there any question here?
Not for me.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay. Then we'll move on to section 1.803, consequences of violation. Any questions on that section? This is a short section.
Not for me.
Would it be fair to assume that we talked about the ethics investigation officer, the city manager has the power to identify and retain? Does that give her the power to pay a stipend if we think that's necessary?
Where are we?
Counselor Tabor, which section are you on?
805, I think, huh?
That's what I was thinking.
1.805.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute.
Or
we're
did
not
I
there
skip
yet.
ahead?
Yeah, I'm not quite there yet. Are we okay with 1.8?
Monday morning.
Yes. Are we okay with
803.
1.803, consequences of violation?
Yeah, everything's fine there for me.
Okay, then 1.804.
Yes, I have a couple things. There's a redundancy. In all members shall be selected, it's about the sixth line down. All members shall be selected by lot to maintain a full board as necessary. And then down below, the BOE members shall be selected by lot and drawn at the first meeting. I don't know if.
I think the question was, how do you fill a vacancy?
I'm sorry?
Okay.
How do you fill a vacancy?
Okay. So,
Yep.
it's needed twice in there, I guess. All right.
Okay.
And then I had, in C, it says the member shall elect a chairperson, and it was before the members of the board, but now the BOE member, so I think that should also be plural.
Yes.
Oh, there's one. There's-
Very minor, but
Okay.
that's it on 804 for me.
Just as a little ministerial thing here for a second. Are you going to get this done, or do you want me to get this done?
You can get it done, but I am taking notes just in case.
All right, got it. So anything that, like Vin's edit just now, I'll take that down and I'll see that gets done.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so let's look at anything else on 804, just to make sure, before we move on.
Not for me.
Not from me.
Okay, 805 then. Ethics Investigation Officer.
Yeah, I just wanted us to think about identify and retain. Could that include a stipend if we think that's? I think that language would.
So it authorizes by this section that the city manager will have the financial resources to do that, or would that have to come to the
The,
city council?
first, in discussion of this, we had thought that it may not be necessary to actually hire somebody. We think that members of the bar, for example, in the city would probably volunteer to do this. They've done it in the past. But if money was necessary, this isn't the place that would authorize money, it's the budget. There needs to be an allocation in the budget for the manager to rely upon to retain someone for money.
So I guess I have a question around that. So if there is an ethics investigation that progresses to the level of the ombudsman, then we would expect potentially, not necessarily, but potentially a supplemental appropriation.
Well,
to
the
come.
manager would have the authority to retain the person. She would have to locate a source of funding. If there was something in the budget without requiring a supplemental appropriation, she could go to that. If there
Okay.
was nothing in the budget, then you're correct, then it would have to be a supplemental
Okay,
appropriation.
thank you. Is everyone comfortable with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The rest of 805, which I think is on the next page. I think most of it is
Struck.
really striking that section, as everyone will note, because this is a change. This is the most significant change, probably, in the ordinance. And so then we come to 1.806.
And I have a couple things on that.
Okay,
In, let's see, B1. It says the review for sufficiency of the complaint will be conducted within 30 days. Does that imply that'll be completed?
Just the review for sufficiency will be completed in 30 days.
But it says conducted, so I was wondering if conducted equals completed.
I had thought so. We could, if you prefer the word completed, we could certainly,
I think it's clear.
okay, we'll make that change.
okay. That seems reasonable to me.
And then in section C, second paragraph, the EIO's investigation shall be completed within 45 days. Is that 45 days from the completion of the, it doesn't say when that 45 days starts. So I would assume that would be start after the completion of the sufficiency.
That's what I had thought in writing it, it would, because that's when it gets referred
Yeah.
to the EIO.
I mean, does that have to be specified in this?
We could certainly clarify it easily enough.
We do have a referral, though, in B4.
Right.
It shall be referred to the EIO and the other parties notified.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got that action happening.
So if you want more clarifying language, you could just put the EIO's investigation shall completed within 45 days of the date of referral.
I think that just is clear, so
Yeah.
it doesn't.
think it's always reasonable to clarify so that everyone understands
Yeah.
the process.
And that's all I have on that.
Is there anything else on 1.806?
Just a copy editing thing. In letter A, we have, the complaint will set forth specific facts with enough specificity. I just wondered if it was simpler to say, set forth facts with enough specificity.
With enough specificity and detail.
So right here.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry, John, do you think maybe delete the second specificity?
But I was
So
thinking
it's
the- I was thinking
specific
the-
facts with enough detail.
The first one, but not the second.
Right here. Right.
Yeah.
Such facts with enough specificity and detail for determination. Is, I think, what Mr. Tabor's suggesting.
Facts, so
with
just delete
enough.
that word specific.
Yep.
Just one. All right. Got it.
It's cleared.
That was all I had.
Okay. So then we're on to section 1.807. Disposition and sanction.
I had no comments on that.
Yeah, that was very much the intent of our discussion.
Okay. Are there any other concerns, questions, comments? 'Cause I think that concludes the
I think,
ordinance.
I think it's pretty tight as it is now.
Okay.
Well, and it'll obviously get a further review by the council,
Yes.
Right.
and I'm sure they'll have input.
I think that's an important distinction you make, Counselor Tabor. I think it's really important for the public to know that the governance committee only sends things forward to the council as a recommendation, and then the council reviews that recommendation. In the case of an ordinance, that requires several reviews at the council level. So there will be plenty of opportunity, additional opportunity for more public comment, in addition to what we've heard here in governance. So,
Do we have to vote to forward this to the council, and should we, before we do that, obviously, we want to get some public comment?
we can, if you like, we can suspend the rules and move public comment up on this matter if we want, specifically, and then have public comment on the second matter on our agenda if we want afterwards, if you would prefer that structure for today.
As long as it happens.
Well, Councilor Lombardi's obviously putting the horse first and the cart second. We'll get the public comment and then vote.
Okay. Can I get a motion to suspend the rules and move public comment forward?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. With that, is there any public comment on, specifically on the Code of Ethics?
Good morning, Greg Mahana, 3 Pheasant Lane, Portsmouth. There was a couple of things that, pretty thorough. But when we get into 1.806, the last couple times we looked at this, there was an attempt to provide some sort of a definition for 1.806B1, sufficient, the word sufficiency. And it seems to lack any type of criteria. I know it's kind of like sticking a fork in a piece of Jell-O, but it does lack criteria. And then the next piece of that puzzle, number 3, where it goes, if the complaint is deemed inefficient, the complainant will be notified in writing of a decision with a copy provided by the charged party. Everything else in town has an appeal process.
Just, there was.
Sorry, Bob.
Yeah, what you're talking about was very much in consideration and thought about.
I remember it,
And
yeah.
and the policy was gonna be, sufficiency will be a low hurdle.
I remember you saying this.
Something to
Yeah.
weed out the,
Yeah.
so what we come up with is this sentence.
Okay.
A complaint will be deemed sufficient if it is determined that the complaint establishes some reasonable possibility that a violation of the code of ethics may have occurred.
The very next sentence I was going to read. Okay. All right.
It really put a lot of thought
So,
into it.
so you kind of moved it down to 3 out of 1 and addressed it there. Okay. Thank you, Bob. Sure. The next thing, a little different. Most processes throughout town have some semblance of a second review, call it an appeal, call it whatever. And this basically says the city manager and, oh no, sorry. It says the mayor and the city attorney, correct?
Yes.
Have the first pass at it. There's a lot more people involved. There's the council. I guess the question would be if someone feels that that wasn't properly reviewed, I think you're stuck going to Superior Court next. Is that?
I would say that's true.
And I just kind of wonder if the residents won't pick up on the fact that a lot of other things, for example, if you try to abate your taxes, you have a couple of different processes, and it's just a comment that it seems that 2 out of a much larger group, if they don't like that, they should have the opportunity to possibly present something to either I like Kate's term, the ombudsman, which is simpler to say than the investigating officer. So that was my point on that. And I won't take up more time. I'll let somebody else speak. Those are my 2 points. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Were we supposed to approve the minutes from the prior meeting? Are you?
We just don't have them yet.
Gotcha. It wasn't on the agenda. Thank you.
Yes.
Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Ave. I agree that there needs to be an appeal process. Some at the beginning. I heard in my own personal case, I heard from Counselor Splain that if he knew all the videos were out there, all the information was out there, everything, he probably would not have taken it forward. I was not given any opportunity to speak on my behalf as a decision was being made. The other thing I'm concerned with in your situation here is it says all parties will have to provide their own counsel and pay for it. I do not believe that's always happened. I believe as a city councilor in some ethics before, Primex would step in. So I guess you need to be clear on that, because I do not believe that has happened in the past. And if that's the way it's going to be, personally, I had to pay for my own, but I know currently some haven't. I also find that there is no out for whistleblowing here. We have no whistleblower law in the books, to my knowledge, of sufficiency. And you should have a right to do that and have a conversation about that. I'm very worried that we're putting employees in this policy. As a manager in a school, we have contracts, we have negotiations, we have our own ethics policies in our schools for employees. And I'm not sure why they're in here, because there is a process. Am I wrong on that or right? So you don't need to answer, but I do believe that you need to put, if you're going to put them in, you need to put those processes in, those policies in here, those procedures, so people understand what is happening and how they can go through this. I also feel that the ethics complaints that I saw at the city level in my tenure on the board, in some cases, we had a woman who people did not like on the zoning board. She was opinionated. A group of 5 men made the decision and said that she was ethical, incompetent. It was a hand-picked group. It was politically motivated. And I'm upset that that can happen. When you give power to people, so like when I heard today that city attorneys say, well, we hope someone locally can volunteer that has a license, that frightens me. That scares me. I would love to see it in here that if whoever we select to, I like the idea of having someone come in and talk to the people and pull this stuff together. I would have loved to have the opportunity to share what happened with me, but I think it needs to be someone outside the city. So I would love to see it written in here that it would not be a member of the city. It would be someone outside that's impartial. I have seen the recent ethics complaints. Again, I find it kind of humorous that we have a whole thing about funding and finance, and those just got bypassed. One was a state law broken. It got bypassed. So I find the ethics seems to be politically motivated and what happens and how it happens. And I don't know how we write that so that we can fix it in here. But I really sense that, if I didn't have the opportunity to show all the videos, because as I've been very clear during my ethics hearing, first of all, it was on Zoom, so I understand it was a little different. But we had 2 people, Mr. Gamester and our school board member, say that they hadn't gotten the evidence before they were making a decision. And the chairman of the committee, and I have it on video, the chairman of the committee said, oh, that's all right, we can go ahead and make our decision. They never got the packet of information, and they shared that. That is wrong. So I don't know how we make sure that that takes place. Now, I have personally decided not to make more videos of evidence because I could put more out there. I mean, we even had our city manager admit that there was a problem and no one acted upon it right in a video. So I guess what I'm looking for is when we do an ethics, we need to also look at our whistleblower law, and we need to kind of put those together and decide what that looks like so people have the right to share what is ethically going wrong in our city. And we need to make sure that we have as much outside the city. It's not part of the politics. It's not part, because every ethics situation I have seen has been politically motivated. Whether it is builders trying to get someone off a board so that we don't vote for a McIntyre, whether it is, people getting off a zoning board because they didn't like the fact that they were questioning ordinance height. So I guess what I ask is, and there seems to be no discrepancy about what goes forward and what doesn't. I find it kind of humorous, some of the ones that don't go forward, and ones that I probably would not want to see go forward, but they don't go forward. So I guess I would ask that you consider all that in this. I feel that having the city manager this much involved is not probably appropriate. It is appropriate for employees, but I would encourage you to look at those contracts, because I think a lot of this stuff you can't even bring up to a city if it's an employee, because in their contract, they have numerous rights of having non-public, and you're saying here that everything must go to the pub, or you're going to have a public hearing. Well, in those employee contracts, it says you can't have a public hearing. It has to be done confidentially unless the employee chooses. Now, I can't believe that the employees would change their contract. I mean, the employee can choose the contract. So I guess I would really question how this lines up with your contracts and your policies. And the other thing is I have a little problem with the fact that the city manager is going to be also in charge of police and fire commissions. I mean, if we have the city manager over everything, then my question would be, where does the police and fire commissioner sit? Because they've always been kind of their own entity. And maybe that's something we're trying to change. I don't know. But that would be my last question. But I think you have some work here to do. And again, I would check policies and procedures in every one of your areas to see if you're conflicting with those. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more public comment? There you go.
Sorry, maybe go to the side. Petrie Huda, 280 South Street. Most of my comments are going to go back to something that I think has been kind of discarded in here, and that is the City of Portsmouth organizational chart, for anybody who doesn't remember. On top are the citizens, which the rest of us are in here, then the mayor and the city council, and then underneath that, the school board, the city manager, police commission, and fire commission. Now, for me, the key points on this are who's elected and who's employed by. As the citizens are on top, we elect the mayor and the city council. We have no choice in who is employed by the city. So my comments are all geared toward this organizational chart, as I believe it's the core document here. So I'll start going through on the red line edition. In number 1801, the definitions, I'd like to call to your attention number F, governing body. All of the governing body commissions and the city council are elected here. In number H, in the case of other officers, you have and responsibilities set forth in legislation or vote. Personally, I would like it defined there that it is city council vote. City council is the governing body. And I think you discussed in the case of the chief of police and superintendent of schools, as mentioned by Esther Kennedy, I think that needs to be really looked at as to who's stepping on whose toes and how the org chart defines this. As, again, the commissioners are elected. The one thing still in section 1802, conflicts of interest, there was nothing included in there about disclosing by any member of any board confidential information that was discussed in a non-public session or a sealed session. I think that needs to be included there. I'd like to have a review and a comment by our legal department on the consequences of a violation, number 1803. Any violation or any provisions of this ordinance shall constitute a cause for public censure, fine, suspension, or removal from office. On that, I believe it should be made clear what constitutes each action there, I guess you'd say. Because, and some of the actions that are listed here, the governing bodies of each one cannot remove a member, even the city council. This would go to the Superior Court. On your section 1804, I noticed there's a change here. The Board of Ethics shall consist of 5 members, 2 members of the council. The thing that seems to be missing here for me is any type of resident or citizen involvement in this. I would ask that you consider that also. There's a little bit of duplication in the how the lots would be selected, but that's neither here nor there. The one that I do have a problem with, and I think this definitely needs more consideration, is 1805. The position of ethics officer, the city manager shall have the power to identify and retain this. This is giving an employee the opportunity to do this outside of the governing body. I don't have a problem with the city manager identifying and bringing this forward to the governing body or any governing body for discussion and vote. But for this to be done outside of the governing body, the city manager is an employee. They are not an elected member of any body. The sentence that says the EIO shall have sufficient experience and training, that is very vague. In the first discussions that we had here, it was discussed that they will have legal and an ethical background, and I think that needs to be more clearly defined in there. The one thing that struck me here in putting in an employee versus an elected official is, in a lot of these places, the assistant mayor, who worked hard to get to their position and is definitely a member of the governing body, was left out in a lot of these. So I personally would like to see the assistant mayor put back in. Let's see. In section 1806, complaints. Such complaint must be based on personal knowledge. Here, I guess it opens it up for a lot of frivolous complaints here. I would ask that you consider evidence here or reference to either a policy or an ethics violation or some kind of actual reference that when the mayor or whoever is going to look at this can go back in and say, it's pretty clear that there has been something that has been violated here. Also, I think you discussed the sufficiency of the investigation. That is also a little vague. Let's see. Going on down to review for sufficiency number 2. The city and mayor, the city attorney and the mayor shall conduct a review for efficiency except in cases which are either subject to complaints. Complaints against the city attorney may be reviewed by the city manager. I really see a conflict in here that this is not a member of the governing body, and in this case, I think it would be a hard thing to do because the city manager obviously works for the city. The city attorney, obviously works for the city manager. And I think that would create a very difficult situation there. And I would ask that instead of the city manager in there, you would move up the assistant mayor in this case also. Number 3, complaints establishes some reasonable possibility that a violation of the Code of Ethics has occurred. This is up to whose interpretation here. This is a big vaguity as I see it, and it's up to a lot of interpretation. I would prefer that it would be more clearly defined so the residency and the taxpayers can understand what actually is being brought forward. Down to number C. The EIO's investigation shall be completed within 45 days. And the representative, okay, 45 days, unless the charged party and the city's representative, city manager, or city attorney mutually agree. This also, I believe, should go up to the governing body. The IEO shall provide written report, that's great, with conclusions reached. Are you really asking the EIO, somebody who's coming in from the outside, to reach a conclusion here? That would be the question. Shall provide a non-binding recommendation. The problem was last time that even the boards that were put in, that were elected, had a problem with the recommendation. So I think this is a little overextension of this position to provide anything. I think when this was first discussed, this person was bringing in their knowledge on both law and ethics on this, and the whole thing on this was to have somebody who understood this to help anybody who was on the committee understand where they were coming from. And the most important thing to me on this would be the independence, away from all of the other politics or anything else that had to do with this. I believe, I think that's it. The only other thing that was a little scary that was already brought to your attention by Esther Kennedy was the last piece of it, which is 1807B. In here, again, you're inserting the city manager, who is an employee, and it seems that you're disregarding the police commission, the fire commission, and any other commission that was elected to oversee the police or fire. So I would encourage you to take a second look at that also. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay.
Chris White, 28 Porter Street. Thank you, Chairwoman, for the opportunity to provide comment. The comments that have already been made are terrific and very helpful. I would just highlight a couple of points. At the end of one spot 802, conflicts of interest. So you've highlighted all these various, primarily financial conflicts, but I would add one more, and that is any other New Hampshire statutes. So all other behavior as defined by New Hampshire statutes or legal precedent that constitutes illegal or unethical conduct, such as RSA 91A, disclosure of non-public information. Because otherwise, with the recital, you're limiting additional legislation which may come into effect in the future. I'm very concerned about the appointment of the ethics investigation officer. That the public needs to have some part in this through the city council. That it should not be done simply by the appointment of the city manager. And so the city council, I think, needs to be the one to identify and then approve the naming of the ethics investigation officer. And while it's implied, it's a little uncertain as to whether the EIO is appointed on an ad hoc basis or whether this is a standing appointment. I'm assuming, reading the material, that it's ad hoc, but even if it is, there should be some mention of the power to remove, because right now the EIO serves at the pleasure of the city manager. Jumping to 1.806, C, first paragraph, the charged party shall have an opportunity to provide a response to the complaint. Is that in passing in the hallway? I mean, there's really, there's no specification in terms of what constitutes an opportunity. And so certainly the charged party should have a full opportunity to respond either in writing or orally. It can't just be so loosey-goosey as is currently stated. And then my final comment is in 1.807, the vote for removal pursuant to the city charter is amended, and I would add on there, and New Hampshire statute, because there are provisions in some New Hampshire statutes which prevent the this ethics process to result in a removal of the officer or employee. So that's it. Thank you.
Arthur Clow, 431 Pleasant Street, Portsmouth. In 2014, a couple of city councilors asked for the New Hampshire Municipal Association to take a look at our ethics ordinance. And one of the things that they found was Section G, which talks about revealing confidential information, should have followed Section 91 of, and I believe 42 of the RSAs, which was what happens to an officer or an employee who reveals confidential information, as did Councilor Tabor on April 4th, when he claimed, and through the newspaper claimed, that the city attorney gave him permission to betray confidential information. He claimed that it was appropriate to do because the decision had been made about who they were going to go to. And then they had a vote about who they were going to go with. So if you read the RFP, it would have said that it may be revealed after everything was done, including signing the contract. So we had a counselor who knowingly violated the law, and our only way to deal with it at this point is to take him to Superior Court, which is in the works. Because you can't betray that kind of information. But I am a bit disappointed with this committee rushing forward without doing any kind of research, really. In fact, up until after I did the ethics complaint, I noticed that nobody had done any change to Section G, which said basically that no person who has business that is contrary to their position shall tell anybody about it. That's essentially what it said, and it was changed to any. First of all, it would be very interesting to compel an attorney who decides that he has a conflict of interest to just sit out without having to talk about his business dealings with his clients. I think that that might be problematic. But this overhaul of the ethics ordinance does not fix the problems. What kind of problems do we have? We had constitutional conflicts where we had people who were breaking the rules during the ethics hearings and having other people helping them when they were remote, and no consequence essentially for that. We had evidence not offered. And now it looks like what this council is doing is taking the citizen connection to its own government away and basically handing it over to the city manager. I mean, we're seeing that in a lot of different ways, but the ethics ordinance, even though we're stuck with the city attorney's office and we're stuck with whoever is the current mayor to be a gatekeeper, we have a process. It gets broken. It's made political. What they did to Councilor Kennedy was awful. I think that you all are giving Councilor Kelly an idea that there's carte blanche behavior. I watched her as a member of the board of Strawberry Bank essentially vote to give some property or lease some property to Strawberry Bank to make a driveway, and that is a residence that is rented out. It's apparent to a high-ranking DPW official. So getting a driveway there, I don't see how nobody raised their hand and said this is a conflict of interest. So we need citizen whistleblowers because I don't see any moral courage on this council. I see a lot of cowardice. I see a lot of narcissism. I see a lot of people who are abusing their power. And as a citizen, outside of my vote, every time that I have submitted an ethics complaint, I have given the background, I've given all the information for Councilor Tabers. They said, well, it's not in the ethics ordinance. And then I looked through, and Section G was a mess, and it was not responded to from the 2014. If you want to see what the Municipal Association had to say in 2014, I'd be happy to point you to the document. It's a public record. It's on the website. But what you're doing here is taking away power from the people. Even things such as telling people that they can't clap, because it would hurt the poor mayor's feelings if we did so. I love my city. I am disgusted by the behavior of people. I'm disgusted that when I've raised my hand as a whistleblower, people as high as the city attorney have put things into the newspaper that claimed he didn't have a clue what was going on. You know, what do I have to do? Just go to the bar, try to catch you before you leave office? There is no place here for citizens to get this government back on track. We are worried. We are worried that you did not want to change auditors. That asks, as a financial person, I have a lot of questions why you're afraid to let go of that auditor. We have problems with everybody who showed up to talk about that settlement agreement with our development partner. Everybody spoke against it, and yet we had a deaf city council. You were elected by the people. Granted, lovely videos put out there that nobody wants to make a claim to that sure as heck helped the election for you guys. But you'll just pretend that they didn't exist, that you might not know who really did it. But I'm deeply saddened for this city that I love to have lost so much integrity over the years, to become grounds for it's not really the city of the open door anymore. It's the city of the backdoor deal. And I suggest to this committee that you stop and take a big walk backward and look through any of the items and get citizen feedback, because I don't see that anybody here is qualified to look through this ordinance and really make it solid so that it can protect our government's integrity. So the hierarchy is the citizens, then the city council, then the city manager. The city manager doesn't need to be part of this ethics problem. Frankly, I think the city manager has some questionable things going on right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to speak? It looks like Peter Whalen.
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just a couple comments. This whole process, I think this committee needs to go back to the drawing board on this and really get more citizen input. The one part here in section 1.805, where you're allowing the city manager to appoint an ethics investigation officer, I think is not well-founded or well-grounded. This is a political process. The people of Portsmouth elect the city council, the mayor, the most vote getter of that council, sitting down with the city attorney, determines whether the process should go forward. Bob Sullivan has always been, he's there to represent kind of the city on a legal basis. The city manager should have no piece at all in this process. Zero. She works for the council. If you're gonna have an ethics investigation officer, that should be a city council vote, and the vote should be a 2/3 majority. And that name should be brought up to the city council. The city manager should not be part of this at all. I think this committee should be looking, you gotta look ahead 10 or 15 years. Maybe you have a city manager who's craving power and wants to remove a few counselors, or wants to remove or change some of the boards. She could play a role in this by getting the right ethics investigation officer, he or she. So I would urge you to kind of go back to the drawing board here. This is not ready for prime time at all. Based on the history with the current ethics complaints and the last, the last ethics hearing, and then the one before that where a person was taking off the planning board. This has not gone well for Portsmouth. It's not our finest moment. So I would urge this committee to scrap this, get some more citizen input, and not go forward with it. It's just not ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else on Zoom? Seeing no further public comment, I'll close public comment on the ethics ordinance revisions. Is there further comment from the committee?
I guess I wonder if, a few people brought up that the municipal association have reviewed such documents in the past. I wonder if they would be willing to review this document, and if that's a good idea.
Can I ask our legal counsel if there's any clarification on that?
I'm sure the municipal association would review anything you'd sent to them, although I don't know that they would make policy decisions for the city. That really needs to be made by the city council.
But I think we should, if there was a previous review about the section,
Yeah, I'm not,
comment on it.
I don't think the city legal department didn't forward anything to the municipal association. It may have been forwarded by someone else.
I have no problem taking more time to look at that, look at some of the other aspects of this, or have a municipal association review. I think that's helpful.
Might I suggest if there are particular public comments that you want to reflect on further, or you would like some comment back from the legal department, that you identify the sections you'd like some particular additional information and thoughts on, and we can, go ahead and report back on those elements. So if there are particular items that struck you as needing another opinion, we can do that. And that's kind of what I'm sensing here, that there are some questions that were raised that you'd like some input on.
I would say the only question I have is that public brought up some issues.
Yep.
I personally didn't necessarily agree with some of those issues, but, you know, that's just me. I would, I'd be more interested to know whether, what's the best thing for the city, I guess is what I'm concerned about. I'm not a lawyer. And the ordinance, the way we've addressed it and we've put a lot of work into, makes sense to me. It makes sense to me to include the city manager at some level. And, you know, I think that the manager has a huge responsibility for the staff. And, I mean, that's a big part of this ordinance as well. So, I think the question had to do with I have no problem with the city manager hiring the EIO, because I think that's a proper role for the staff, not the council. We don't hire people. We authorize the manager to hire people. Those are my immediate comments. I'd have to consider more.
Okay. I have a few questions for legal counsel. Okay. Do we have a staff whistleblower policy?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Do we have a staff whistleblower policy?
Do you want me to answer that? Or?
Yeah, I'm not hearing it.
Oh, sorry. Do we have a staff whistleblower policy?
It's not hearing it.
A staff whistleblower policy.
No.
There is a state statute, and in addition, we have various policies relative to no retaliation, et cetera. We make reference, the employees are all aware of and have acknowledged the code of ethics that is in Chapter 1, and are familiar with it and have training on it. So we generally rely on the state whistleblower statute and our non-retaliation provisions that are in other parts of our policies.
Okay. In furtherance to that question then, everyone is beholden to state statute who is either elected or serves as an employee. Is that accurate? And therefore, state statute would not have to be referenced in any code of ethics.
I mean, from our perspective, and Bob,
Right, I wouldn't want to answer the
yeah.
question without actually looking at the state statute again. But everybody who's subject to the state statute is subject to the state statute.
Right.
And nothing that is done here would affect that.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. That helps.
Can I just add one last point?
Yes.
Mr. White raised that point in connection with violations of the Code of Ethics. There's nothing in the Code of Ethics about protecting people that make ethical complaints. That was my point. It's certainly within the authority of the council to do that.
Okay. Thank you. Are there, And also, I have a question about removal. And the reason I have this question is that we've recently seen in the news another city council has removed a city councilor for a violation of ethics. So am I to understand that there is a possibility of removal if there is a violation and that does not violate RSAs?
Shall I answer? There is certainly a way in which a councilor who violated the confidences of a non-public session could be removed from office.
Okay. Okay. Does anyone have any additional questions?
I think in our initial review of the ethics ordinance, we studied some of the other ethics ordinances. And would it be fair to characterize the relationship between state statute and ethics ordinance as state statutes are the base layer of protection, and some communities have added an ethics ordinance on top of that to deal with conflicts that they feel elected or staff people have committed that need to be investigated and dealt with. But by assumption, all of the state statute protection is already there. The ethics ordinance of our city or all the other cities in the state is something to create additional ethics accountability. Would that be a fair characterization?
The basic relationship between the state and the cities in the state in New Hampshire is that all of the cities and towns are political subdivisions of the state and are subject to the rules adopted by the state and have only those authorities which are given to them by the state. So I think that means yes to your questions, yes.
Okay.
Right.
Are there any other comments?
I would just say that I think we should take a look at the foundation we've already got with the work we've done to date. We've kept the initial review. We've made a standard for sufficiency for the complaint to move forward. We've introduced the investigative piece, which we heard from testimony was lacking. We've got the investigative part and the report, which then has to be reviewed by the Board of Ethics, and there can be appeals made to them, or the board can decide to investigate further on its own, and any action that the board recommends has to then be taken up by the governing body, whether it's one of the commissions or the council. So it's a multi-stage process. I think the most important thing is there due process? If somebody feels evidence is being overlooked, is there due process? I know when we did the investigation, the Board of Ethics process in the Kennedy case, we made sure that there was ample chance to present evidence and to cross-examine the complainant and to make final statements if more evidence was required. So I think, let's take a look at it and make sure there's due process.
Okay. The committee has worked very hard in reviewing the Code of Ethics. Hopefully you all can hear me. And in doing so, we've taken into account views of the people who've participated in the process. We've had several opportunities for public comment. We have made significant revisions based upon the input we have received from people who've participated and from the public. No process is ever going to be perfect, in governance especially. What we do is we try to improve the process from where we stand and hope that the improvements that we've made make the process more successful and make the process more open, transparent, for everyone involved, and fair. And in the case of ethics, you really want to make sure that the process is a fair process, that there's plenty of opportunity for anyone who is accused of a violation to have a chance to share their own views and be taken seriously so that they have due process. I believe that in that sense, we have improved this ordinance. And while I understand that not everyone is going to be happy with the end result, I do believe that it is much improved from where we started. And I think it's worth trying these revisions at this point.
I would say that we are a third of the council. And that by bringing it to the council for public discussion, we can only improve that process. I think that we can gain a lot of further experience and expertise from the other counselors. So I guess at this point, I would make a motion to move to submit it to the council.
With the changes we made today.
With the changes we made.
Okay. Is there a second or no?
I'm intrigued by the idea of a municipal association review. I think there might be value in that. And unless we feel some urgency, that might be a good thing to do. Have we ever done that with draft ordinances in the past?
Yeah, you know, it is not my ordinary practice to refer anything to the municipal association. Frankly, we have our own legal department capable of doing anything that they can do. But they're there, we are members, and if the committee wants to forward this to the municipal association, we certainly would do it. It would be helpful if you would provide some direction as to what it is you would like the municipal association to do when they conduct a review. As I said, they're unlikely to offer recommendations on policy, I think, although they certainly would review it for compliance with state law.
In legal counsel's opinion, is this ordinance as written in compliance with state law?
In my opinion, it is, yes.
Okay. And can I ask also our deputy legal counsel if she shares that same view?
I have to say, I didn't have an opportunity to read the last draft, but I'm willing to be comfortable with the city attorney's opinion on this.
Okay.
So,
Okay. And so if we sent this to the municipal association, would we also just be asking another attorney at the municipal association for, again, to review this? Is that essentially the way that they would work?
The municipal association, they try to be cooperative and helpful, and they are certainly general experts in municipal law in the state, and if you have some request of them, I'm sure they will try to satisfy it.
Okay. Okay.
I was thinking that the municipal association would have broader familiarity with ethics ordinances of other municipalities and might be able to know some best practices and look at this in light of those best practices. It's a hypothetical. We don't know how much value we'd get out of that. And I would want to know their feelings about whether the governing body or the city manager should appoint the ombudsman.
Mm-hmm.
And how our ethics process dovetails with state statute.
Okay.
And I would be interested in whether they think, whether they recommend a whistleblower clause or a whistleblower policy.
Okay.
That's me speaking as one of the three members of the committee. Reaction of
Yeah, I will say this. First of all, since there's no second, I'll withdraw my motion. And then I guess I would like to make a motion that we take the time to submit this to the Municipal Association for review and clarification on some specific points that we should detail for them, and some of which John has already cited.
Okay.
I'd second that.
Okay. Any discussion?
I think we had
Most of
pretty
it?
much all the discussion.
Okay. I will add my comments then here to discussion. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask the municipal association their view. The one thing that I would say is I would prefer to limit the requests specifically to looking at whether or not there's any conflict with state ordinance on ethics. And the reason I say this is I think it's really critical that we make policy for our city the way that with what works here in Portsmouth. And while I think it's important to have their views on ethics ordinances across the state and what they've seen or not seen, I don't know that they have necessarily done a review to say what is effective and what's not effective. Whereas they can come back and they can say to us, well, but this is how this city does it, or this has how this other city does it. That doesn't necessarily give us an indication of whether or not that process has worked successfully for them. And Portsmouth is in a unique position that we have direct experience with the ethics ordinance, and we have gotten feedback and gathered information from people who've participated in it. I think that that, in some ways, is more valuable than knowing the way that other municipalities have addressed ethics, and in some ways, than not knowing, clarifying how effective that is. So I think it's reasonable to ask them for a review and say, does it fit with state ordinance? And ask for an opinion on policy on appointments. But at the same time, the way that we work as a city is we have a council manager form of government, and the city manager does do all the hiring. It would be completely out of character for the council to hire somebody. One thing the council could do is approve of a hire of the city manager, but not necessarily hire someone. That's always been kind of outside of our scope. So I would not want to upset our form of government by changing that process necessarily, but I'm happy with asking for a limited review.
Yeah, and I think this is a good discussion because some people have wanted to guard against the possibility that the manager would use that appointment power in some improper way. But I would also point out that you could have a block on the council that could use that power in a way to push the process in a direction that they would like. So, I don't think you can ever take politics out of ethics process. You have to have as much sound investigation of facts and due process from both sides, and a body has to make a decision. But beyond that, human beings are not angels. So.
Thank you. So let's take a vote on the motion.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we will refer the ethics ordinance to the Municipal Association for review, specifically under the questions asked by and specified.
I'll take care of that, I'll do it. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make the edits that you voted today, and I'll send both a red line and a clean version, because it's easier to read, to the Municipal Association with a list of your concerns, and we'll see what comes back.
Thank you, City Attorney. The next item under review by the committee is discussion of committees itself. If possible, can I ask the Deputy City Manager to share that for us? I spent some time going through, for beginning our discussion, going through the list of the committees on the website for the city, going through the ordinance, which lists all the committees, and the administrative ordinance, and then making some notes on how these committees are established, who they report to, the terms of individuals on the committees, whether or not they're blue ribbon committees or standing committees, and the challenge that we're dealing with as a committee in addressing that issue. Okay, so we have a long list of committees, and I think it's important to note that this is very much, my listing is very much a draft listing from just initial review of all the listing of committees on the website and in the ordinance. You will note that every committee that I had questions about, I put in bold, and the question that I had was highlighted in the last under the challenge column. What is a challenge in dealing with this committee? Several of the committees on the list are defunct, but they're named in the ordinance. So in introducing this, what I'm simply doing first is sharing the list of committees with everyone so that we can go through and look at the number of committees we have, committees, commissions, and boards as a city, and also to ask questions about, what is the standing of this committee. So with that said, today we're just going to look at overall committee structure, and I mean overall committee structure, not in depth, and talk about when we do an ordinance review. Are there any questions about this extensive list? Yes. Councilor Tabor.
Terrific piece of work, and thank you for doing this. It occurred to me that we might want to consider a two-step process. First, committees that seem to have become inactive or defunct, and should we deliberate on whether we should sunset them, and then a second part where we look at from the point of view of governance, are there areas where we can involve citizens for new programs of work or reorganize programs of work? We've got, for example, 2 park boards or committees, but no overall parks committee. We've got several sustainability committees. We've got a blue ribbon committee, which is not permanent, around the arts, things like that. But would it make sense to first look at committees that are no longer active, and should we look at whether to sunset them and then new programs will work?
Okay. Good suggestions.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, and thank you, Councilor Cook, for putting this list together. So once I saw this list this morning, I started to send out some of the emails to various folks who may have information. For example, the chief building inspector, in terms of the Board of Plumbing Examiners, Building Code Board of Appeals, Building Commission, to have him double check the state statutes and get any information he has from his perspective, because of course he's worked in other municipalities and so that I could begin to pull together information to provide to this committee on is it an appropriate item to sunset or update the ordinance, or is this something we should enliven or envision? So yeah, if you want to keep going with this conversation, just know that was how I was starting to think of it as well, which is maybe we work with the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, of those that maybe it's just time to take off the books, or have that conversation about do they need a reboot. So.
Thank you. I would add one more layer to this discussion as well. I think this is a really good start to start with. Maybe the easy things to handle first, whether or not something is defunct or should be revisited, and then and talk about maybe restructuring a little bit if necessary, and have that discussion. But I think that we also need to have a discussion, and you'll see this in my notations on rotation. I always say rotation ? In reviewing the terms lists for all of these, the committees and boards that are appointed in the ordinance, several of them have terms that are off schedule. The only one, I think, when going through and looking at terms that were on schedule, the only one on schedule was the Recreation Board, which kind of has 3, and 3 terms, and they're on a normal rotation, whereas all of our other rotations over the years have gotten off schedule. So that is another thing that the council asked us to address. So we also have to include that in the review. And that's why I notated them as rotation, whenever there's appointments that are off schedule. So, so that's another part. I guess that's the third part of the review that we have to address as well. But I think that Councilor Tabor's suggestion is a good one, starting there. Then, once we're through the committee structure, we also have to talk about ordinance review. The questions I have around ordinance review is we will automatically be discussing the ordinances by discussing the committees, at least those that are established by ordinance. But not all committees are established by ordinance, and there are other things also in the ordinance that we probably should just at least review in the administrative ordinance. My suggestion under ordinance review would be that we start by dealing with committees and we fix anything in the ordinance that needs to be changed around the committees, and then we go through and review everything else in the ordinance after that to make sure we're consistent. Does that seem like a reasonable schedule?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And I think that that's all we have for today on discussion of committees. So following the schedule that Councilor Tabor suggested, we'll start our next meeting by looking at those that are defunct or inactive. And yes.
If I could, would it make sense to get input from staff on some of those? Or at least a little history of?
Yep, that's, I agree. Yes, that's why I was mentioning I'd already reached out to the building inspector thinking I could begin to put together information for the next meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
And maybe copies of the ordinances that created them,
Sure.
so we could all read those.
And I think that we have most of these, the reason that I know about them is I pulled them from the ordinance. So they're in the administrative code already, which I think everyone has a packet that includes that. So that's where I pulled them from. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known they existed, frankly. Several
we'll
of them.
just go through the administrative code using the search function for each of these.
Yes. They should be there. And some of them I knew existed because they were on the website, but I didn't go and look at the ordinance related to it. For example, cemetery committee, we know, was just established by ordinance. I didn't need to go back and look at the cemetery committee, and you'll notice reporting to the city council established by ordinance. They're 2 years by the mayor standing, and I have a question on rotation only because they're appointed for 2 years same way a Blue Ribbon Committee is appointed. They're one of only 2 standing committees appointed that way. So the question is not whether or not that's a problem. The question is that the way that do we want to have 2 standing committees established by ordinance that are appointed in the way Blue Ribbon committees are appointed? So that's a bigger question. But I didn't have to go look at the ordinance for that one. So, but the others that are potentially inactive, that's how I found them. So, are there any other comments? I want to open up to public comment on this portion of the meeting.
Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Ave. I would love to see a copy of what has been put together. We didn't get the information as a public. And I just want to make a quick comment on the fact what you did to send it to a local government center. I did the one in 2014 to local government center. They're very good. They're very supportive. They will look at it in terms of legal for state law. They're on top of these kinds of things. They have different attorneys that work on different issues. So unlike the attorneys here at the city, they're practical. They're just they're a jack of all or Jill of all trades. They have specialties there. The other thing that we sent to the local government center was when we were looking at who had to sign financial funding forms. And a lot of the stuff that we did came out of what we got from the local government center at the time. Another counselor and I went and met with the local government center, took our information from the city on what the financial responsibilities and what you had to report and that kind of thing, and took our rules that we had here and then came back to the city with the information. And it was a different point of view that wasn't, it was again more local, it was more driven from state laws that weren't necessarily in our ordinance at the time. And it really gave us an idea of who should report what. And both times I felt very supportive. As the 2014, that came out of the fact that we had the ethics complaint on the zoning board that I thought was interesting and not appropriately done. And as Mr. Clough said, it's on the website, so it's there. So I know the city's attorney said he didn't have it, but it is on the website. So I think I'm glad to see you do that. I think it gives it just another perspective, given this is so controversial, given that it's so in-depth, and given that I heard even everyone say that it was political. I think it's good to have another outside source, given the fact, too, that you're adding in the city management, and all our attorneys are under the city management. So they have to honor with the city manager because they want to save their jobs. So I get that. But this way you'll get another point of view, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any additional comment? Yes.
Peter Huda, 280 South Street. I'd like to thank you, Councilor Cook, for going through this. I think this is long overdue. The one thing I would ask that you add to this is if a committee was allotted any funds, taxpayer funds, and that is still sitting out there, and what the status of that would be. What comes to mind here are ArtSpeak, or funds that were previously allotted or given to a committee that does not exist anymore. So I would ask that you look at that. And the only other thing is, if you could put that out before your meeting so the rest of us can take a peek. Thank you.
Any additional comment? Is there any comment online? Make sure. Okay. Seeing no additional public comment, then I'll close the public comment session for this meeting. Is there any other business? Okay. With no other business, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.